Deputy Leader of the Opposition.
Thank you, Deputy Speaker. I rise this afternoon to give my contribution on the budget before the House, and in doing so want to create some commentary and some truthfulness in the way this government represent the financials of Tasmania, the way this government represent the budget that they are putting forward before Tasmanians, and also want to share some stories about what it really means when they're not honest about the circumstances in Tasmania, what it really means to Tasmanians, to individuals, to families, to communities, when they don't speak the truth, that they raise expectations and then they pull the rug out from under hard-working, valuable members of our Tasmanian community. So I want to start with a bit of a picture about a small town in the northeast of Tasmania, an incredible town of about 200 people, a couple of hundreds of people, somewhere between 200 and 300 people, the town of Branksome. And the town of Branksome is an incredible indication of things that are possible in Tasmania. The town and its businesses and its community deliver incredibly to the local families, to individuals. They gather at the pub, they have a great time together. I've been many nights at the local pub where there's been local birthday celebrations or local community celebrations. But also within this little town, we have businesses that construct and deliver unique items right across the country. We have businesses in this tiny little town that are regarded across the country for the work that they do in this community. We have a great meal that does really important work for the state of Tasmania. But the truthfulness of this budget, the pressure of the decisions that this government make, the tightness that creates within different departments and different government businesses across Tasmania impact towns like Branksome. They impact communities that live there. And so I want to use the example of where this government are not upfront and honest with Tasmanian people through, for instance, one of my portfolio areas, the energy portfolio, and the way that they use that to assert with our government business enterprises negotiations in, say, power deals at Bell Bay Aluminium, one of Tasmania at the other end of the scales, our largest commercial organisations employing a large number of Tasmanians, supporting a large number of businesses across Tasmania, actually rely on a great little business in Branksome, the Branksome Sawmill. And if this government are not honest and upfront about the pressures that they have in the Tasmanian finances, in their budget, if they don't call to account their government business enterprises to act in accordance with their ministerial charters, then the impacts of those decisions that look like big politics actually have real and tangible material impacts in the lives of Tasmanians living in the northeast of Tasmania. Branksome Sawmill have a very diverse range of offerings, one of which is significant, which they provide things that they construct specifically and uniquely for Bell Bay Aluminium, which is a significant part of their business. And in the event that Bell Bay Aluminium by the next 12 months are unable to secure their power deal, then businesses like Branksome Sawmill will have a critical impact on that local community. It'll mean less jobs for locals, it'll mean less jobs for apprentices, it'll mean less jobs for people that live in and around that community, it'll mean pressure on the local pub, it'll mean pressure in the other businesses that rely on having that workforce available. It'll mean pressure on the local schools. And so when this government don't stand up and they're not honest about the things that impact Tasmanians, it hurts our community, and that really upsets me. What actually drives me in this place is the way that we can work together across a parliament to support individuals and families, that we can support communities to actually lift Tasmanians up. But what gets me down in this place is the inability of this government to be honest and truthful about the work that they're doing, the work that they're not doing, the mistakes that they're covering up, and the way that they simply seek to try and blame others for the circumstances that they've created. Because a little bit of commentary about the budget. It is easy for the Premier to stand up and say, you know, things are difficult, or the Treasurer to stand up and say things are difficult and blame COVID and then blame the chapters of time since COVID. But we know, and it's on the record and it's reported, that this government, 11 years in government now, before COVID, were were already running the state into financial disrepair. It was already on a pathway for budget mismanagement and financial mismanagement before COVID hit. And yes, COVID did have an impact in Tasmania, but for the years since, there are many reports that lead to the fact that the financial circumstances that we find ourselves in Tasmania right now are directly due to the decisions that this government makes. They are directly due to the policy decisions that this government has made to ignore the reality and ignore the pressures in Tasmania and continue blindly down a road that is sending Tasmania broke. Continuing down a road that is actually having a real and tangible and material impact on young Tasmanians, businesses in Tasmania, community sectors in Tasmania, because of their high disregard for reality and their high disregard for looking after Tasmanians before they look after themselves. On the weekend, again in northern Tasmania, I had the absolute delight to attend the Ringarooma show. It's a show put on by the school students in a small community that is tight and connected. And I'm a real believer that what happens in one level in a system happens in another level in a system. So Ringarooma is a great indication of what can be possible in Tasmania. It is a community that comes together, supports each other, wraps around themselves, even when it's bucketing with rain. They're outside having a great time together. Even in difficult times, they stand up with each other. But when you talk to Dorset House, that were representative at the show on the weekend, there is grave concern about the challenges for our communities and our community sector being able to continue to support Tasmanians in the area that Tasmanian Labor really care about, in the area of housing, in support for housing, in the area of education, in the area of health for Tasmanians. There are greater and greater pressures being applied to our community sector organisations, yes, in our cities where we see it front and centre all the time, but also in our regional and rural communities. And they're the communities that worry me. They're the communities that when we're making decisions here in Hobart or in offices in Launceston or Devonport or across the coast, that we need to remember the small communities that are the heart of the economies in Tasmania. And when we have our community houses expressing concern, when we have TasCos deeply concerned about the impact of this budget, which is full of cuts, which is full of broken promises, then this government needs to take a step back, stand up, take a breath and go, you know what, maybe the time has passed for us to just keep kicking the can down the road. Maybe the time has passed for us to try and paper over the mistakes that we made. Maybe now we need to stand up and be honest with the community. Because where this government and this Treasurer, the third or the fourth Treasurer in as many months as they've been in Tasmania, says we're on a pathway to surplus, it grates me when the reality is and the truthful for that is not true. It gets reported. What also annoys me, sorry media, is that it gets reported because he says it, and I know it's not true. And what it means is that Tasmanians have this little glimmer of hope, but the little glimmer of hope is actually raising expectations, perhaps encouraging someone to spend a little bit more than perhaps they have available to them because they think things are going to get better. But if this Treasurer can't actually create a positive cash outcome in his budget, then he can't stop debt. And if debt doesn't stop, then we can't make our way to surplus. And he knows that. The government know that. Treasury officials keep telling them that, but they continue to ignore it and continue not to be truthful with the circumstances of Tasmanians. And that is not fair, because we know there are Tasmanians in households, there are Tasmanians in small and big business that have invested significantly off the back of the misinformation presented by this government. And it breaks me when I have these conversations. The Premier on his feet just earlier said, we are a government that will not let any Tasmanian be left behind. We are a government that works for every Tasmanian. Well, I don't know when the last time was he was in his electorate office. I don't know when it was the last time he spoke to the electorate officers for his members, but I know on this side of the House, we have daily people in our community coming into our organisations and into our offices, having organisations advocating on their behalf, where they are unable to secure the housing for themselves and their family, secure appointments with specialists in the health system for themselves, not for years ahead. They are concerned about shortages and pressures in the education system that aren't being able to support the teachers or the conditions in classrooms or classroom supplies, which therefore can't support their children. It is not truthful for this Premier to say that this government has not left Tasmanians behind. This government is intentionally misleading Tasmanians and causing them to make decisions not formed on real information, and that is putting them at critical circumstances. We know right across Tasmania now, it's not only the physical health of Tasmanians that is under pressure, but it's also the mental health of Tasmanians that is under pressure. For many Tasmanians in their business communities, in their social communities, there are a lot of people under pressure, and there are great organisations in this state that are under financial pressure as well because of the lack of support from this government, that are not able to do the work required to ensure that they can wrap their services around all Tasmanians. There is an increasing number, a really worrying and terrifying increasing number of young Tasmanians, young, hard-working, successful Tasmanians that are at the brink and the edge of their mental health. And that's not okay in the state of Tasmania. So one of the things over the week ahead that I'm going to be calling on and interrogating through the estimates process as we go forward, but also through the GBE's process, is bring out the truth of the budget, bring out the truth of the financial circumstances for the people of Tasmania, because Tasmanians deserve it and this government needs to be held to account. You've heard our leader and our shadow treasurer say that the role of Tasmanian Labor here is to call on the government and keep them to account, to apply intense scrutiny, to put the screws down on this government who continue to let Tasmanians down, to pull out the mistruths of this government and to have them stand up and face the reality of the circumstances that they have created. Just this morning, it is absolutely absurd that the Premier of Tasmania can stand on his feet and challenge the integrity of the Auditor-General of Tasmania, who in writing has said that the circumstances around the TT line in Tasmania have got to a point where he is concerned of their solvency. Now, there would not be much more a stronger statement made in the state of Tasmania that the credible and professional Auditor of Tasmania would feel compelled to put that to writing, would feel compelled to put that in his report. But that the Premier of the day wipes that aside and say, you know what, and fair enough that he would trust the board of TT Line, fair enough that TT Line would get their own advice, but when questioned and pressured by the leader of the Labor Party whether the Premier himself had any alternate advice around the position of TT Line and its solvency, he was like, I don't know. Well, I don't know many premiers around the country who, when faced with a state-owned company, not a government business enterprise that the Premier would have us believe, but the state-owned company, when suggested that there were solvency issues, wouldn't get immediately their own advice. And if there is advice, we challenge the Premier to actually table that. The Treasurer himself was speaking to us some advice today, but wasn't willing to table that when requested through interjection from this side of the House. What is written in those documents? What is coming ahead to Tasmanians because of the absolute failure of this government to deliver on what is reputed as one of the greatest assets to Tasmania? Tasmanian Labor in our past successfully purchased and delivered on time and on budget the spirits that we have servicing Tasmania now. And they're important because they're important to the reputation of our tourism industry, but they're important because they actually move the premium products that are grown and produced here in Tasmania across the Bass Strait. They're important because of the freight task that they play. And when Tasmanians were told untruthfully that there would be increased capacity on that run earlier last year, they invested in that. They invested off the back of that. Many people put themselves under financial pressure because of the mistruths of this government. And one of the things that is horrendous to continue to hear is this government say they're being open and honest with Tasmanians, but we know that it was only relentless pressure by Tasmanian Labor that in fact even started that the government would be honest about the circumstances that have been unravelling around TT Line in Tasmania. And we know that it's not at an end. We know that this government, because of their inability to upfront and in a very straightforward way respond to questions around TT Line, there's got to be more coming down the line. There's got to be greater hurt. And every time there's something that puts a financial impact on Tasmanians through their inability to deliver, it puts pressure in the system and means that there is less for Tasmanians. The more interest that's paid on bailouts, the more money that is lent for bailouts, the more money that is put into things that this government can't deliver well, means there's less for Tasmanians. There's less for health services, there's less for housing, there's less for education, there's less to support young people into jobs and to support our economy, there's less certainty in investment. When this government are not honest with people, then people are challenged to make the decisions to invest. One of the greatest intentional mistruths, and I hate sometimes where you can't use just blunt language in this place, but one of the greatest things that this government has done in recent times, where they have intentionally preyed on the pain points of Tasmanians that we don't see at all in this budget, is TasInsure. If you set aside the concerns around TT Line that operationally might be challenging, you cannot ignore the realities of this government's intentional misleading of Tasmanians through the election to put forward an idea around TasInsure that they never intended and knew they never had the capability to deliver. TasInsure preyed on the pain points of Tasmania. In the northeast, I've spoken of already, I know farmers who have had horrendous increases in their insurance premiums, and we know that there is a problem with insurance, but you can't actually pretend to provide a solution to a pain point, to a problem, with something that's not going to deliver, because it just creates worse circumstances for our farmers, for our businesses, for individuals and households across Tasmania. For this government to go so far as to present themselves up with their jackets and their hats and their shop fronts around TasInsure and say, you know, maybe they could have just stopped at the point where they said we're going to create this insurance offering for Tasmanians, but they actually went further to say that it's going to reduce premiums and reduce grocery prices. Now, Tasmanians off the back of that sort of offer would think, you know what, we're going to back in the Libs in this election because of the promise they've made. But this budget, there's not one reference in the budget speech, not one reference in the budget documents around TasInsure. It is a complete scam, and that is what's underpinning this government at the moment. And when you've got this government presenting these opportunities to Tasmanians, making promises to Tasmanians, and Tasmanians making their decision to support this government off the back of that, that's just something that they should be all ashamed of. That this Premier wrote letters to the aquaculture industry, to the salmon companies, to the greyhound trainers of Tasmania, and said, you know what? And I have heard people tell me, I have heard Liberal Party voters tell me that they were told that you can't trust Labor because they'll just do a deal with the Greens and they'll shut down the salmon industry or they'll shut down greyhounds. But right now, here and now, we have got a Liberal Party that put in writing their support for the greyhound industry, for the salmon industry, and just weeks later turned their back on them. I've been out to the races and I've met some of these families who for generations have been backing in a sport that they love, who have been backing in the animals that they love, who now have kids and grandkids who wanted to see a future in this industry, who have actually established themselves on a pathway to be active in something that they are passionate about. These are good people. These are good people from our community. And without regard for Tasmanians, without regard for the impact on them, their lives, their mental health, their physical well-being, the well-being of their animals, just to rip that out from them and the future and their futures in Tasmania is horrendous, and the Premier should be ashamed. To have written letters to the salmon industry saying that we back you in and there's no way under any circumstances that we would ever do a deal with the protest parties of the crossbench, and then just weeks later to rip that out from those communities is horrendous. I share a story, and I've shared stories of the northeast. I want to share a story of the west coast, and interjections from across this place before said, you know, Tasmanian Labor will never stand up to Australian Labor when we need to be backing in Tasmanians. And I can tell you that you can't believe anything that this government says, because Tasmanian Labor are on record. When we supported the communities of the west coast, we stood up against the Australian government. We don't mind what colour or what flavour the Australian government is. Is there a time to, when there's a time to stand up for Tasmania, we will do that strongly. We will do that relentlessly. We will do that because we actually care on this side of the house. We care for individuals. We care for families. We care for communities. We care for business. We care for the confidence of investment in Tasmania. On this side of the house, we care for the communities of the West Coast. Like when I was just in Canberra recently, on the way home, I got to have a chat to Salty, a well-known legend of the West Coast, who was there on parent help with the students from Strawn Primary School. If this side of the House didn't advocate for the West Coast communities, for the communities of the salmon industry, there might not be a Strawn Primary School. I've mentioned Ringarooma, I've mentioned the Northeast. These schools of Tasmania in our rural and regional communities hold those communities together, and they are at risk from the mistruths of this government. One of the things that Tasmanians will get to see over the years ahead is that Tasmanian Labor are determined. We are committed to create a positive future in Tasmania. Right now, there is a void of leadership and vision in Tasmania for the future this state could be, for the things that this state could deliver. Tasmanian Labor, we're at work. We are connecting and talking to and hearing from Tasmanians. We're understanding where the pressure points are. We are doing the work to support Tasmanians at a business level and at a community level. This government is on notice. Tasmanian Labor, we're angry about what you're doing to Tasmanians. We will be relentless in our advocacy for Tasmanians. We are going to outwork you. We are going to outthink you. We are going to outpace you. And when you continue to undermine Tasmanians, when you continue to take the rug out from under their feet, we are going to stand ready to stand with Tasmanians, to support our families, to support our businesses, to make sure Tasmania can have the future that it deserves, and I know that we can create.